Hey, welcome back to the Street Theology Podcast, where we bring current events and theological concepts to a street level. Now, this month, in honor of Black History Month, we are putting a pause on new episodes to highlight and redrop past episodes of Street Theology that bring a relevant light to the impact Black culture has on our society and our faith. In the episode redrop this week, we sit down with Pastor Tyler Burns and discuss the Black Christian experience. Now, Tyler is the president of the Witness Black Christian Collective and co-host on the podcast, Pass the Mic. We hope you enjoyed this episode with Pastor Tyler Burns, recorded last year.
We are super excited, to have this guy. And again, Pastor Tyler Burns, again, he's the lead pastor in DCC in Pensacola, president of the Witness, a Christian collective, author, writer. Again, co-host, Pass the Mic with Jamar Tisby. Hit it from all different angles. But here's the biggest thing. Again, he won't say this, I'll say it. He is a big deal. You know what I'm saying? He is a big deal in the body of Christ. But more than being a big deal, one thing I've been so impressed with in the few days of us getting to know each other is the fact of just really true humility. How this came about is just, I've been a big fan of the Witness and of what they've been doing there. Also Pass the Mic and actually spoke at the Q conference, and I just put it up there because it was such an incredible 9 minutes. Again, if you have not gone, go to YouTube. We'll put it in the show notes to go listen to it. The Q conference, but I just put it up on my Instagram story, and he responded back, and then we kind of got into a dialogue. It's like, hey, would you ever want to jump on a podcast? He's like, I'm in Pensacola. I'd love to come over. So again, it's just been an amazing. So Pastor Tyler, man, we are so thankful you're here today, man.
Oh, it's my honor to be on the podcast. Street Theology. I love it. Thank y'all for having me.
Man. It's nothing. We are glad you're here. And again, for you guys who are tuning in, maybe for the first time, Street Theology is simply about this. We believe that in the world that's to come, it's about this idea of innovative reconcilers, people who are connected to God, one another, their meaningful work in earth. And what we want to do is give you practical ways to take theology, to take things of the gospel and really bring it to the street level, to your everyday life. Many times things are so disconnected from our everyday lives. And so what we want to do is bring it there. So that's the point of the podcast. And so we're really excited today. We're going to jump right in. Again, normally we do some stuff. We're going to jump right in with Pastor Tyler. But here's the thing. There's a couple things we got to start off with before we get this thing popped off.
Okay.
First of all is this. You put something up on your Instagram story that we got to talk about. Okay. And this is what we put up. They don't even know what I'm about to talk about, but this is what we got to put up.
Yeah, I'm scared. What's going on? I feel like this rebuke, like
No. Low key, it is gonna be one. And here's what it comes down to: as a man who is a huge voice in the body and for the culture, how is it as a Black man you do not know how to play spades?
Hold on. Wait, hold on. So here's what I want to say. Okay, in my defense.
Okay.
Right? I come from a household, we are paper Bible saved, okay? That means we save for real. That means you don't play with cards. You don't gamble. You don't play with cards. You don't even touch a card deck.
Really?
I'm serious. That's how I was raised. You don't touch a card deck.
Man.
And you know what? Every time I would go to family reunions, you know what they would always say? Oh, you don't know how to play spades? Oh, he don't know how to play spades. But they don't ever teach you how to play spades. See what I'm saying? No. They're like, man, he don't know how to play spades. And it's like a thing for like the next 10 days. Yo, that's a dude that don't know how to play spades. I'm like, I'm a human being. I was created in the image of God. Like, bro, like, even worse. Yeah, like I have dignity. Like I'm a person. And they don't care, man. So yeah.
Listen, I'm just telling you right now. I feel like there will be just another level of anointing that gets unlocked in your life if you learn how to play spades. Listen,
here's the funny thing I gotta say. My homeboy Sean, he posted a video. He was like, "It's for all y'all that don't know how to play spades. Tagged me in it. It's a 2-minute video." He said, "Now y'all don't have any excuse." I'm like, "How am I supposed to learn a complex game in 2 minutes?" It's like putting a 2-minute video about driving, be like, all right, no excuse, go drive, hit the freeway. I'm like, bro, come on, man. Like, sit down with me, disciple me, man. Spend time. This is biblical, bro. I don't understand.
I'm just saying, here's the reason why. Because I would give you this. I would give you that there's 100%. This is a culture. We are going to shame you. There's just no way around. You don't know how to play spades, we're going to shame you. Now, but
here's
the
culture, man.
Everything, we're going to shame you. But here's the other thing. I think it's always why people don't want to teach people is because it's always like, it's like spades is kind of one of them things where it just happens, right? So you have to bring like, hey, yo, we're gonna play some spades. So when you playing spades, we ready to get the game going. And then all of a sudden you got somebody, and then if you competitive, you like, oh, the person don't want to know how to play spades, right? So my wife, I love her to death. She's like, well, why don't you teach me? I'm like, no. There's YouTube and Google and all that. Go figure it out. So when something pop off, you ready to play spades.
Oh, man.
You know what I'm saying? Listen, and that's one thing I'm doing right now. I started thinking about the other day. My son. Listen, as a black man in my home, I was like, listen, over the summer, we gonna learn how to play spades. You gonna learn how to play spades. I cannot, like, I feel like passing out, teaching him the ways of Jesus and teaching him the ways to play spades. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't want him to feel shame in his identity.
That's what I'm saying, though. It's part of holistic discipleship. And I just don't think people understand, like, man, we gotta bear with us, man. Be patient, be long suffering. That's part of the fruit of the spirit, man, to be long suffering with people, and people just not, not long suffering. I'm telling you, every time I say this or every time it gets out, if spades is brought up, I leave the room. I'm serious. I leave the room. I'm like, I got to use the bathroom.
Yeah, they get there.
Bro, it's relentless, man. Yeah. So anyway.
It is.
I'm going to work this out in therapy.
All right, there we go. But one thing we do, because again, we like to know, again, a lot about our guests. And so, we are big fans of hip hop. So let me ask you a question. If you had to go top 3 rappers of all time, who are you putting in your top 3?
Are we talking artists? Are we talking lyricists? Are we talking stage presence?
No, listen, no. We're talking.
That's the kind of question I would ask.
You would ask that. Here's the reason why. And here's the reason why. Because y'all gonna ask these questions, and this is what I'm saying. That's like asking the question. It's like, we talk about basketball players, right? We talking about best shooter, we talking about the best overall player. Like everybody want to talk about lyricists, and that's what is it right there for lyricists. Because when you start talking about lyricists, it's like, oh, that's like literally saying who's the best rebounder. The best. No. At the end of the day,
lyrics is important with rap. You know what I'm saying?
It is 100%. It is just like shooting is important in basketball. But I'm not gonna say Steph Curry top 3 of all time.
That's not?
Oh no, he made top 10, 15. But I'm not saying that. So I'm talking about overall top 3 rappers.
Total package, huh?
Top 3 rappers.
Jay is in there for sure.
Starting off right.
Gotta put Kanye in there. I'm sorry.
No.
And then I think number 3, I am not at all a fan of this artist. Not at all, but I'm not a fan of this artist's music, but I think you do have to put Pac in there. Yeah.
Unpack that with me about Pac real quick.
He kind of has a more spoken word style delivery.
Yep.
And so I think for me, lyrically, it was hard to listen to the music, even though the messages and the personality was so big. So I think for me, I like more flowy lyricists. So my favorite lyricists are Mos Def, Black Thought. It's where they kind of become one with the expression of lyricism and, the beat and everything. So I think that's why I kind of have this thing in my head about Tupac. But it's respect because of, we talk about impact and putting the total package together. You kind of can't leave them off the top 3 list. But
yeah, I tell people I always have an issue with Pac, and here's what my issue with Pac is. And you talk about how you get shamed when I get shamed on social all the time because I say Pac ain't even in my top 5, and here's why. Let me tell you why.
No, I'm fine with that.
Here's why. Because everybody, Pac had these hits. I'm like, man, Pac put out 720 plus songs in a very short time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Pac got a lot of trash in his catalog.
Nobody
want to say that.
Nobody wants to say it.
Right? It's Pac. So it's kind of like it's like the Mount Rushmore. You can't say nothing about Pac. No. Pac got a lot of trash in his catalog. You know what I'm saying? But I will say he do got bangers. But that's one of the things I'm like, he put out a bunch of stuff versus when I say why I put Biggie over, that's because when you really look at it, there's such a small catalog. Yeah. But they just could do their thing. You know what I'm saying? And that things like that. But I definitely go with you when you say Kanye's a good one because nobody want to give Ye. Nobody want to give Ye his flower. Ye.
It hurts, but it's true.
It's true. Because here's why. Because everybody, they think of MAGA Ye right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's just be honest.
They think of MAGA Ye versus but I'm like, no, don't forget, listen, everybody's wearing polos and backpacks. You know what I'm saying?
5 classics?
Yes.
In his catalog?
5 I think
classics?
He does.
At least 4, for sure. 4 it's like a definite. How many artists do you know that 4 definite classics and you could argue a 5th? I mean, you can't leave them off the list.
No, you can't. And then on top of that, his level of production. Because that's the thing. We're not talking about just lyrically. We're then talking about all the production that comes along with that
Absolutely.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, but again, everybody knows this on the pod. We're going to jump into it. They know I'm the biggest Jay fan in the world. I'm the biggest Jay fan in the world. And so, I mean, listen, whatever got me the other day, I was watching him on the shop the other day.
I haven't had a chance to look at it.
And it was incredible. But here's the thing he talks about. He was just like, thinking about, listen, as great as he was in the wave and all the stuff Jay does, realizing that Still Dre is one of the hottest songs by Dr. Dre ever.
Idea he ghost wrote
that song. And they asked him, how did you do that? He's like, well, I got into the mind. He's like, I had to literally get into the mind of how Dre comes, how Snoop rides a beat. And so when he wrote it, I wrote it like this. And I'm like this. I'm like, yo, he wrote one of the hottest songs in hip hop, and like just go. Yeah. I mean, you know what I mean. And that's what I tell people:
history.
Don't let Big Pimpin' fool you on the lyricism of this man. And so,
Jay is incredible. Yeah, I also think if there's someone who can sneak in and take Pac's spot, I think if he actually produces music, I think Kendrick is close for me.
Yeah,
Kendrick is close for me. Yeah, he's definitely right now top 10 for me.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know what you want to say.
Really, really great storyteller, man. I love listening to Kendrick.
Yeah. He does. He puts you in it, man.
He puts you in that.
Yeah, I mean, he's closest up there with Biggie. Big used to put him with Big. This only thing about Biggie though is like, I got saved. Like, come on,
look, man, the misogyny, man.
Yeah, that was the thing. And plus, the other thing too about Big had me up in there, literally like in the whole thing about a robbery. I'm like, I'm in there full masked up with Biggie too. Like, I'm masked up. Hey, you know what I'm saying? I got fake chopper spraying. I'm in there with Biggie.
You like, hold up. Yeah, kick in the door. You like, hold up, wait. I'm saved now. I'm redeemed. Like, oh, snap.
Oh, man.
Redeem robbers, you know?
Oh, my God. All right, y'all. Well, listen. We're going to jump right in. We're going to go.
Nah, man, let's keep going to our hip-hop, man.
I don't know how we go from there, bro.
How we go from there is how we do it all the time.
But that went like deep. That went like we went.
Oh, listen, deep. Hey, man, we did. So, Pastor, I know you guys. You listen. You're just sophisticated. When you and Michelle, y'all sophisticated in here. So you go ahead and get us moving.
Yeah, man. I think it's just like always. Start off. Tell us about yourself. Family, ministry, how you got started in ministry, and the other things, the many other things that you do. So,
man, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Born and raised Pensacola, native son. My father founded a church that I now pastor in '92 on Easter Sunday.
Wow.
And so growing up in church, PK, all the stories and stereotypes about PKs are true, believe them all. I got my call to ministry when I was 16. I was actually at a conference in Tampa at Paula White's church. Did you know that?
Wow.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Bro, wait a minute. This is the second week that I'm hearing people that I like just say like, hey man, I was a part of.
Yeah, Angels from Africa.
Oh
yes.
My God.
Yes.
Yeah. So
your boys on Southside, KB and them was like, yeah, we used to be a part of Paula White's church.
Paula White's church, yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, so we were, my parents were friends with her for years. We'd bring her in to speak at conferences and things like that. And so built a relationship with them, took our youth down there. And she wasn't there, I don't think, that weekend, but they had a prayer time at the end of the conference. And I just had a radical encounter with the Lord. Was, a Pentecostal staple is being slain in the spirit. So I was knocked out, was out for, I think, 45 minutes to an hour. I woke up, I was like, why didn't y'all call the ambulance or something? And they were like, nah, you were talking the whole time. I was like, I was talking the whole time. I'm like, man, it's a demon or something. And they were like, nah, you said, the only thing you said was, God, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And they said, you just kept saying that over and over again. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then the next day we had kind of a recap. It was Sunday morning. So we had, youth camp, come back, everybody, on fire. Yeah. And they handed me the mic. And that was the first time I preached. It felt like fire was coming out of my mouth.
Wow.
Yeah. I was literally, my whole body was like on fire. Like I was like, I felt like I was burning up. And I felt like that was the moment when I was like, oh, this is what God has called me to do. And so being saved at a young age and watching my father preach and teach the gospel, I said, I never really want to do that because there's no way I could do what he does, right? I just had that mentality in my mind. And so, so I got the call to ministry, and then I, wrote it down. Okay, well, I guess I'm called. And I said, God, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Just really don't call me to preach. I'll be a missionary. I'll be, I'll serve people in the background. And God, you tell God your plans and God laughs. And so I decided I was going to major in stuff in college, completely different from preaching, teaching, pastoral ministry. My senior year, one of the TAs who was in one of my other classes, he reached out to a group of us and said, y'all should take this class in pastoral ministry. Again, nothing related to my majors. I was a double major in philosophy, radio broadcasting. And so they were like, man, you should take this pastoral ministry class. I was like, no, I shouldn't. And I got in there and it just, very, white framework, white evangelical framework, but it just completely transformed my view of ministry. And at the time I was a spiritual life director on campus at Liberty University. And so I was already kind of pseudo pastoring guys on a hall for, 52 guys on a hall for 2 years, and got a radical call from the Lord to leave it all and come down to Pensacola. Wow. And so I said, this is the devil. I said, it's the enemy. Yeah. I was rebuking everything. And then God was like, no, it's me. So I prayed and fasted for 7 days. Didn't eat or drink didn't eat anything for 7 days, and prayed and asked my parents to do the same. And they said, we think God's called you to come back home. So I came back home and was just waiting to come back to Liberty to do what I needed to do. And then our youth pastors just resigned one day. Just like 2 weeks after I got back, they were like, we're done. And our church staff was all like, looked at me. They're like, they're like, yo, we're going to put you in the ministerial training program and, get you to do everything you need to do. And then we'll ordain you. So I got ordained in 2010, youth pastor for 9 years, and then got ordained as lead pastor in 2019. So it's kind of how I got to where I'm at right now. Married to my wife, Marlena. She's incredible. 6 years in April. We have 2 kids, a 3-year-old daughter named Trinity Zora and a almost 2-year-old son named Benaiah Langston. We like to say we keep it first name biblical, second name black. That's how we do it. It's a formula, man. It's a formula. So yeah, they're the joys of my life, and I do everything for them. They're my why. And if they asked me to leave it all behind, I would. So yeah.
That's really good. So obviously we knew you through the Q conference and what we heard in that video. Just curious to what inspired you to pick that topic and just about the paradox a little bit of being Black and Christian.
Yeah, so the overarching topic of the talk they picked for me. So they picked the topic of the gift of the Black Christian experience, which is impossibly broad and in 9 minutes makes me extremely intimidated. Try to talk about. And so I tried to think about what is truly the gift of the Black Christian experience. At The Witness, we talk a lot about the Black church, but we talk more about the expansive Black Christian tradition. And that was a kind of a terminology that Jamar and I coined in 2018, I think. And it's the idea that we're speaking to the expansive Black Christian experience, which is bigger than just the Black church in its original 7 to 9 denominations. But it also includes Black faith activists who take their faith into the streets, like Fannie Lou Hamer, who are ostracized by the Black church, and also Black evangelicals or Black Christians in white spaces. Like a Tom Skinner or, John Perkins or many other people who are navigating what it means to be authentically Black and Christian in those spaces that they're not the majority of. And so I'm trying to navigate, what is truly the gift of the Black Christian experience. And there's so many different ways I could go. And really what I found is the gift is the ability to sit in between, pain and power, the ability to sit in between the paradox. And the story I told about my aunt was a story that shaped my life and my future. And the brilliance that I see in Black Christians is our ability to sit in the paradox of great suffering and lament, and also great joy and power. And so I said, what if I built a 9-minute talk off of the paradox? Because that's, I think, what we all face on a daily basis. And so I actually wanted to do more proclaiming about what we go through than explaining to a predominantly white audience. So that's kind of how I structured it the way that I did. So I didn't want to spend time talking about Black people. I wanted to spend time talking to Black people and talking about what God has done in us, but not talking about us to an audience. where we're not present. So that's why I structured it the way that I did. And yeah, hopefully it was helpful. You know?
No, it was incredibly helpful, because I think for me, one of the most eye-opening parts for me was realizing that, you know, I believe that there is a real emphasis that God is actually doing of centering Black voices in this current cultural moment. But what I got from it, and again, it's the power of preaching is how, you know, one person can grab this from it, other person grabs something else from it. And what I grabbed from it was realizing how important it is that, you know, this thought of, you know, because sometimes, you know, you grow living and being Black and being Christian is that you just go through and you're like, pain is just what it is. Like, you don't ever really think about it, you know? There's the only thing where you're like, oh, okay, this is what it is. But then realizing, oh, I realize what we've gone through, but yet and still being faithful. Yeah. And I think in the age that is to come, we're actually going to be those who actually can truly help all people, especially here in the West, walk through as it becomes more and more of a, you know, I think hardship and suffering that comes against the body of Christ in general. Those who are Black actually have the ability to actually help to be able to do that. One, for us to walk through, but also how we actually, because we've been doing it. We know what it's like to be a minority. Like, that's, I feel like it's like being a double minority. You know what I'm saying? Like culture and stuff like that. So I took that and it was really helpful. I think the question I'm going to ask you is this thing where, you know, some of the things that people will say, you know, today is that, you know, well, we're all Jesus followers, right? So why are you emphasizing the idea of a Black Christian? We're all Christians, you know? And, you know, sometimes people will quote Vody and just be like, you know, again, I understand, yes, we are one human race, but the idea though, but why do you think it's important, or why are you guys actually kind of making those distinct? You know what I'm saying? You say Black Christian and kind of going from there.
Yeah. You know, I think anybody who tries to rob us of complexity and nuance is not doing gospel work. But is actually trying to make people feel comfortable. And naturally, the gospel is an uncomfortable, disruptive reality. And so I think the first thing that I would say is anyone who is saying simply to dismiss a conversation that, oh, we're all one, but not understanding the complex realities of what we live in, is not getting into the depths of what God intends to do with humanity and the remnant of people that he's called to himself. We emphasize Black and Christian because it is important for us to not neglect or erase the contributions of specific people in specific times. Acts 17 says, you know, that God ordered the times that we live in and the habitation of our dwellings, so that we would seek him and find him. He's not far from us. So God intentionally uses culture to reveal himself to people. So if God intentionally uses culture to reveal himself to people, it also means that there are intentional contributions of each culture to the mission and the work of God that should not be minimized or erased, but should be highlighted. And in our current cultural context, we're having an excavation moment of the fact that we were not taught the contributions of people who look like us. And we have, those contributions have been erased or minimized or distracted. And what it does is it presents a monolithic, monocultural presentation of God, which, if that were the case, Peter and Paul, one would have been irrelevant because they were reaching different cultures. They were reaching Gentile and Jew in different contexts, and what one thought one was supposed to be doing, the other one was doing actually. And so they would have been irrelevant, right? But they actually enter in and engage uniqueness. You take a look at the pastoral epistles, or you take a look at, you know, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, what you see is there's unique presentation of what Paul is actually addressing in intentionality to each one of those cultures, because there were different things that the culture was navigating and dealing with. And so our uniqueness and our individuality and our specificity is a strength. It's not a weakness. But the reason why it makes people uncomfortable is because we have been more shaped by our American context than biblical depth and understanding. And so the things that we should lean into, we run away from because it violates our empire culture. And that culture would rather like to silence what is culturally unique in order to homogenize everything because it makes it easier to deal with. But Jesus says, I'll sit in the messy with you. So make it specific, because my power extends cross-culturally. So we don't all have to have the same everything. I can operate in whatever culture. And so now the power of Jesus is lifted high because we're specific.
Yeah. I'm wondering, I'm hearing you talk about it. I'm wondering, is what's it might be a lot of stuff underneath it, but I'm thinking, is this about power? I mean, you're saying like, man, I'm uncomfortable, and you're messing with like this kind of empire stuff up here. Yeah. And once I give room and space, that means, are we talking about power here? And it's like, hey, now I'm feeling a sense of loss, and I need to fight for it.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, I think it's definitely power. I think it's also comfort too. And I think when you get comfortable, you start to idolize the settings that put you in the place you're in now. Yeah. And so you say, well, because I'm comfortable, God must be in it. And so you've taken comfort and you've made comfort your God. Right. And so now you worship the scenario that you're in. You worship the comfort of not having to deal with race. That's why there's such a disruption. Oh, okay, well, I don't have to talk. We don't need to talk about this. It's comfortable for you not to talk about this. It's comfortable for you to silence the conversation. And so now who do you worship, God or your comfort? Your comfort, right? So I think there is that, comfort element. And yes, there is a power element as well, because I think what people don't understand is that whoever has the majority of spaces and spots in positions of power get to shape the ideas that we think about everything. I was recently at a retreat that kind of excavated early African Christianity. And it was so mind-blowing to hear scholars and experts talk about how there were African Christians who were reforming the church long before our reformers, that we lift up and highlight, and people like Shenouda and Zaria Kobe and Moses the Black, and obviously Athanasius and Origen, and we're excavating names of people that are not commonplace in the Christian world. And why is it that they have not been highlighted? Well, because it makes more sense for us to highlight Eurocentric, names and experiences, because that's what gives us power. And so what a lot of people didn't realize is that those names have been silenced because they mess with the implicit doctrine of inferiority, which gave white Anglo people power over Black voices, faces, and bodies. And so when you silence the fact that Zaria Kobe or Shenouda or whoever in the African context was actually having these conversations before our reformers, well, now that messes with the idea that, oh, they're inferior people who don't understand and can't think properly. And if you tell them that narrative and they believe it, you can control them.
Yeah. Wow.
And then you can use them for your benefit. And that's where the power, sin truly corrupts, right? And it corrupts our understanding of people too. So that's why we're specific. And that's why we talk about what we talk about. Anybody who thinks God is unintentional misunderstands the text.
Yeah.
So.
Can you talk a little bit about what the balance of, I guess, discovering all of that is? So sorry, my brain is taking in everything. So I guess, just the whole concept of the inferiority complex, even theologically, I think is something that is new to me. Mostly because I was raised around like white people for my whole life. So even just like understanding how Black excellence exists, how educated Black people are just in science and politics, theology is new. So for people who aren't used to learning or knowing about Black theologians because they've always taken like white evangelical perspective and now they're discovering it. How do we not go to the extreme of only this is true? How do you hold tension and have more of a diverse, I guess, theology, even like globally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's first, and what you talked about at the end about globally, I think is so important, that the West is not the center of Christianity. Establish that first.
Yep.
Establish that the West is not the center of Christianity. It's not where the majority of Christians are globally. It is not where God is doing the most work, even though it is the most popularized. So I think you have to start by breaking down this cultural superiority that exists that says we can only find truth here. Right. Because it's a quote unquote Christian nation or whatever that may mean. And so I think we also have to understand that there's going to be unlearning and learning. And so you will unlearn things. And as you unlearn things, you also have to learn things. Mm-hmm. And so one of the disciplines that I've tried to do and promote is, how would I explain the doctrine of God outside of a Western context? Mm. And how can I learn about theology outside of using the Q evangelical words that are typically found, especially in our Southeastern American experience, mm-hmm. where Christian cliches flourish, but people don't know what they mean. Mm-hmm. Right. So it was like a challenge for me whenever I was preaching the gospel when I was a teenager. And, when I got my call to ministry, I would preach everywhere, nursing homes, the streets, like the projects, wherever. And I said, man, you just need to know Christ and the pardon of your sins. And homeboy from the block, he tells us, like, what's that? And I was like, the pardon of your sins. He like, what's that? And I was like, I don't know, but just do it. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, fam, I don't know, bro. And we don't realize how much we use. We don't realize how much we use language that is based upon Christianese cliches. Yeah. And so I think the beauty of Black theology is helping you, and Black theological voices, I should say, is helping you to understand God from the margins, not from the center where white Christians have occupied for the extensive, history of our country. White Christians have occupied the center, so they have set the terms and the rules and the boundaries and said, go no further. And if you only hear from white Christians, you will only think that they are the authoritative voices. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think the first thing is, we have to expand our idea. No, this is a global movement. This is a global faith. I think secondarily, we also have to expand our ideas of that we're going to unlearn and learn, and that's going to be a lifelong process. Mm-hmm. But think about it. If you've learned for 20, 25, 26 years, or however much it was for me, only one thing about theology, mm-hmm. to unlearn that, and then to learn the same or even similar amount of theology from Black voices, mm-hmm. it's going to take sometimes what seems to be an imbalance of understanding and intentionality in how you're learning to offset the imbalance that you naturally have, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So if one side of my body is imbalanced, the chiropractor has to aggressively shift. Right. Right. And the aggressive shift brings me back into alignment. Right. But so for some people, when they say, okay, for this year, I'm going to read Black authors only, people are like, oh, that's, and it's like, well, I have to shift because I have such low understanding of my own people that I have to bring it up and center it. Mm-hmm. And it seems like it's an imbalance, but it's actually a correction. Yep. From what was out of alignment.
Yeah. So. And that's really good, because I think, when I used to do training, as a basketball training, it would be like when I'm emphasizing something with somebody, it was like all we would lock in on was something. And, mm-hmm. That sometimes, I would have to talk to parents like, well, do you feel like this is like the, do you feel like, there's all parts of the game. Why are you just focusing on this? And because I would tell them like, well, this, like, listen, it's like Thanksgiving dinner. I say all the time, this is the dirtiest dish in the sink. Mm-hmm. This is what you fry the macaroni and cheese in. This, everybody else want to wash the spoons and the forks. Right. But then what that macaroni and cheese is based in, you got to get that dirty, because once you get that dish out, it makes everything else easy. So I would tell people, I work with you on this, because if you unlock this, the stuff, this other part of the game will just open up a whole lot, because you have this. And it's been the same thing of what, and again, I love how you communicate that, because there's been such an imbalance. And I tell you, in my own, walk with God, and over the last, again, 20 plus years of serving Jesus, it was this idea to where I'll never forget. And I tell the story sometimes where, my grandfather, pastored, and again, predominantly Black Baptist church. And I'll never forget sitting there. I was like 08, 09, something like that. And just talking to him. He was actually here in Tallahassee, and I was talking to him, and I'll never forget, that was when I was heavy, in the Reform world. I'm like, I'm feeling, I'm about to teach my grandfather, pastor for I'm about to teach him a lesson about theology. And I asked him the question. I was like, why don't y'all talk more about, you always talk about, just, this, the future and heaven, all these types of things. And it's inspirational, but there's no depth. And it's, I'm literally going there. Right? Yeah. And so he was so gracious. He looked at me, and I'll never forget this. He was like, grandson, he's like, we talk a lot about heaven is because Black people, we understand hell. Mm. He's like, we have to have future hope. And he said that, and I was like, oh, You know what I'm saying?
Right,
and then I started
right.
talking to him. He started unpacking theological. So I'm like, granddaddy got like, he deep with this, right? And what happened though, I realized because I was so taught, and I tell people that was really hard because I was so taught for so long that the culture I came out of, there was no depth there.
Right.
And
right.
and here's the thing, the truth about it, people didn't do it intentionally.
No.
It was just a part of the wave of culture.
Yeah.
And so now, and that's why I try to tell people now, what you're seeing is a lot of Black Christians are waking up to like, oh, I didn't realize that just not meaning to was push here. Now you're seeing this overcrowd, and then everyone now freaks out. Well, hold on now, this is going to separate the church, and this is going to And I'm like, because for the first time, you're actually putting Black voices to the middle to say, no, there's something. And it's been super helpful. And that's what I've appreciated so much about what you guys have done is you actually like, you're constantly giving us, oh man, here's somebody read this. Here's it. And it allows you like, oh, let me dive in. And you're seeing such a part of ourselves, like in the story and the impact of that and stuff like that. So again, I love that context of being able to kind of say what you said. I think
I do want to say that I think what you said about the fear of centering Black voices is something we need to lean into.
Yeah.
I think there is an implicit idea that hasn't been discipled out of us that Black voices are going to be either quote unquote militant or radical, or there's also this cultural inferiority context that if someone who looks like me is exercising authority, that I have a lower chance of being biblically faithful or solid than someone who looks like Tim Keller or John Piper or whoever. It's just the mentality. No one is believing Jesus in isolation of their culture. No one is.
Wow.
No one is. I don't care who you are. Like, we just want to teach the pure gospel of the word, and we just want to teach this. I'm like, listen, I hear what you're saying, but you're deep fried in culture just like us. You just don't know it and you don't acknowledge it. And so I think sometimes we have to interrogate, what is your concern? We can't just ask one question, which is, should we censor Black voices? We must ask the next two questions. What are your fears? What are you afraid of? And who do you think we're going to be when we stand on the stage? What do you think we're going to say? What about our culture makes you think that because you saw one Black preacher on television, you know all Black preachers?
Wow.
Because you saw one Black church caricatured in a Tyler Perry movie, now you know all Black churches.
Yeah.
Oh, so you can spend decades discovering deep theology, but you only need an hour to figure out all Black churches?
Wow.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
As soon as you start to ask more questions, then people's hearts start to, and I'm a pastor first. We need to do some heart work. We need to do some heart work. So if us saying center Black voices is offensive to you, if us saying we need to hear the perspectives of Black Christians and they should actually be censored because you can't talk about issues that matter to Black people and not have Black Christians in the room, that's a heart issue. That's not a cultural issue first. That's a stronghold first. Let's work on that.
No, and I appreciate you actually speaking into that. I think, what people don't realize is when you always have been in a place, you lived in this, I've lived in this and that, being in this place when you come in and you're the only one in the room. Like, you're the only one in the room. And I think that's the part I tell people all the time. I'm like, you don't know what that's like when you're the only one in the room. Everyone's saying, well, why are you, again, jumping into corporate space, DI space? I'm like, why are you doing these things? And why are you putting, I'm like, because I'm tired. I'm tired of, like I said to you earlier, I'm tired of Black people having to be magical. I'm like, I don't want my son or my kids to have to be magical. You know what I'm saying? I want them, hey, they can be, they can be good humans and maybe have a skill set that's average, right? And still have impact, success, and can do those things. And I think so many times when people are like, well, why are you guys pushing it? Because it's never been pushed. It's never been the middle. And when it is, it's always like you're the one. And so we were talking about this earlier, and I actually want you to speak to this because I think sometimes getting people in the context of how it feels. No, seriously, how it feels when you're actually the person when you walk in a room and you realize it's like when you were speaking at Q conference. I was telling you about the story about my father being the first Black basketball coach at University of Akron. Like, when you go on those stages, you aren't just speaking for yourself.
No, I'm representing the whole community.
The whole culture's on your back.
Yeah.
So it's like, speak that. Because I think sometimes people don't really, they don't understand. They're like, well, this is a great opportunity. I'm like, you understand the pressure? It's not like I'm just going up there. I'm like, yo, I feel like I feel like you were telling me, I feel like all Black culture is riding on me getting this right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I when I stepped on stage at Q, my mentality was, I am representing all Black Christians in this moment. And the few Black Christians who are in the room, I must represent them well. And then my people who are going to watch this, I must bring meaning to their experience and, proclaim and speak to them. And so my mentality was, I have to be the best I've ever been. That was just my mentality. It was like, I have to be above superior to be heard.
Yeah.
And then my content has to be good enough to actually be listened to.
Yeah.
But to get in the door, I have to be incredible. Like, that's just what we think. So to get in the door, we have to be, 12 out of 10. And if we're not 12 out of 10, people are going to dismiss us just off the fact that your mentality is natural. And this is just how people are. And I saw it in the comments afterwards too. Sorry. But I saw in the comments afterwards too, is your mentality is you are going to be surprised if I'm good.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you're not going to listen unless I'm excellent.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be excellent to get in the door, and then maybe you'll listen to me. And so I felt like I was representing all Black Christians. And what's so sad about that is, you talk about centering Black voices. I could name off the top of my head 30 people who could probably step up there, do just as good, if not better than me. Black people. And you never heard their names. I promise you. It's some dudes from Pensacola. Blow your mind, make your head spin.
Wow.
You think it's only me? You think it's just me and Jamar? Like, it's just like, wow. People are like, oh wow, you guys. I'm like, man, it's like it's 100 of us.
Wow.
Y'all just haven't given them space to live, breathe, speak, and the platform. They just need opportunity. That's why we do what we do at The Witness, and we platform so many different people. Because I'm like, you ain't never heard of these people. And now when people hear them, they're like, oh, wow, look at this person and that person. I had no idea. It's like, they're everywhere. They're in your city, and we just haven't given them opportunity.
That's incredible. It's incredible because like I'm so glad that you're here, because for me personally and experientially, The Witness was actually I wish I would have had a camera on my face when I saw like, oh wait, there's a whole bunch of like other Black conservative people who are like reformed and thinking and all this kind of stuff, but but what? I was completely blown away. And so I'm on my own journey of unlearning and learning. And one thing that I want to be able to talk about specifically is this idea of what do we mean? Let's dive into that for our listeners. What does it mean in terms of, because there seems to be all this fear around like Black theology or white theology. What do we actually mean by that? Because as I've begun to read and study, I'm finding myself saying, I've never in my life as a minister of the gospel seen myself in the text. And so this is not a thing that we're making up when we say how important this is. So let's talk about what does that mean so that we can kind of tone down some of the fear and what, all that kind of stuff if that's present.
Yeah, that's a great question, man. That's a great question. I think there's a academic term called Black theology, which is kind of shorthand for Black liberation theology. But that is not the expanse of what we mean when we say Black theology. So the first thing to understand is that when we tag something as Black, let's say the Black church, right, which is such a tenuous name in and of itself. But when we say the Black church, what we mean is we're tagging it that way not because Black people wanted to self-segregate, but because they were not allowed to exist, flourish, and thrive in white church spaces. That's what produced the Black church, was an intentionality around the experience of being excluded. So you take Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, who founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church. They founded it because they were praying in a white Methodist church and were asked to leave. Or they were praying in a white Methodist church and they were asked to go back to their section, which was up in the rafters. So they couldn't pray where white people prayed. So as a result, they said, no, we need to create a space where our people can be seen, can be heard, and valued. Mm-hmm. So they went and founded a Black church in a Black denomination. And so as a result of that, you have to understand that Black people don't start stuff just because they want to start stuff. We start stuff because there's a gap. Mm. And there's a gap in our theological perspectives and our bodies being valued in these spaces. Now, when you say Black theology, that is typically what people think of when they say Black liberation theology. And I actually like to think of it more in the context of the expansive Black Christian tradition, as I was mentioning, because I think hearing Black voices, because there are Black people who would, fiercely agree with Black theology and Black people who would fiercely disagree with Black theology as a frame of reference and as a mode of operation. And there's so many continuums around that. So I think as you think about Black theology, why do we call it that? Well, because all of theology and our understanding has been either coded or presented as white or Anglo or European. And as a result, we were just sprinkles. We were seasoning here and there, but we were not ever seen as the main course. That to be a minister of the gospel or to be considered legitimate, you had to be familiar with Calvin and Luther and Spurgeon, and thankful for their efforts, but you didn't have to be familiar with Gardner Taylor or Sojourner Truth or Frederick Douglass or Fannie Lou. You didn't have to be familiar with any of them, though they were Christians and some of them were even scholars as well. And so Black theology is emphasizing the perspective of Black thought and theological understanding, specifically in the academic term from a liberation theology lens. But that's not all of Black theology, because Black theology is not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. So we don't act, think, or do the same. Yeah. And so what I encourage people to do is find voices that, and this is part of the learning, unlearning. I encourage people to find voices that they trust and that have been helpful for them, and ask them or watch who they read. Yeah. So when I was on my own quest, I listened to Black preachers, and in listening to Black preachers, I would listen to who they quote. And when I saw who they quote, I'd go and find those Black homileticians like Frank Thomas or Kenyatta Gilbert or Martha Stewart. And what I would do is I would go and I would find out who they were referencing. Right. And so Kenyatta Gilbert has, I think it's this book, I think it's called The Journey and Promise of African American Preaching. I think that's what it's called. But that introduced me to all kinds of names, Black Christian names. Now, here's the thing. You're going to have to do more digging to find them. Yeah. They're not going to be at your Christian bookstores. They're not going to be promoted on Amazon. You have to do digging to find them. Henry Mitchell, who's the father of Black preaching. Then I found him. I couldn't give Q if I didn't study Frank Thomas, Kenyatta Gilbert, Henry Mitchell, Martha Stewart. I couldn't give I couldn't talk about how I talk how I talk at Q if I didn't have them with me. Right. And that's just preaching. Those are just 4 essential Black preaching names for homileticians and trainers. That's 4 names. And that's not even getting to systematic theology. It's not even getting into bibliology, biblical languages, how you read the text and understand it. Doesn't even get into people like Kane Hope Felder, who wrote Stony the Road We Trod, Black Interpretation of the Bible. It doesn't even get into, it's a drop in the bucket. Yeah. And so they're not prominently seen and acknowledged, but they are essential for understanding your experience in the text and your experience with God and how it's unique. I got some other names that I got some books here that I'll kind of pull out here.
And just for our listeners, I just want to make sure that everybody's understanding. So it's like the reason why even that is important. It's like, well, why is that important? That's important because, like he was saying earlier, there's no one who comes to the text just devoid of their culture and things like that. So that if in the white evangelical space it's only been those voices, it means we're only getting a perspective, and that's devoid of all the not just pain and suffering, but all of the experiences that other people have had. So.
And what's so sad is we're just having a binary conversation.
Right.
We're just having a binary conversation about Black and white. So whenever people are like, "Oh man, the this is a multicultural perspective. No, it's a bicultural perspective. It's black and white.
Right.
Right. What about, we haven't even talked about, Latin American theologians and Asian American theologians and indigenous theologians. We haven't even talked about them. Yeah. And so this is a lifelong journey of unlearning, but also adding to your library and your vocabulary, names and experiences that will help you understand how, and this will deepen. This is not just Black theology and Black theological names, and Black churches are not just for Black people.
Right.
They are first for us because they speak to us, but you will learn and understand new things about God by listening to Black preachers, by listening to Black theologians, by listening to Black voices. You are denying yourself the gift. We know the gift because we live it.
Yeah.
Right. We've experienced the gift, and intrinsically we know there's something unique, but the gift is also an invitation for those who have only heard one perspective and are not a part of our culture. This will bless you too.
That's it. That's it. And I think that's where, kind of practical is, I was, we were talking, at dinner and afterwards, I was like, I think for me, what really hit me is when I would always, you don't realize what is so baked in culture that your natural, as a Black man who truly is for Black culture and simply power, how I, not even knowing, would dismiss someone Black simply because they're Black.
Yes.
Simply because they're Black, and you don't even know you're not doing it consciously. You're not like, you know what? But literally, I was telling Tyler, I was sitting there, I'm like, man, all of a sudden I'd heard some Bishop Jakes had said. As soon as I heard it, this was years ago, my natural thing was to go and say, okay, what is Spurgeon? Well, it was like, it was either Spurgeon.
Is this true? Is this right?
True? Is it right? And you realize, and I was like, and I'll never forget, later that day, I was like, I'm literally questioning and being I am simply questioning because they're Black.
Right.
I'm questioning because they're Black. And I'm like, how crazy is that for me to question that because they're Black? When I'm like, they are, I was like, hold up. Well, I'm like, they are heretics of all races, right? There's heretics everywhere. And it's not that, but why do I do that? But versus when I see this person, I'm like, oh no, I naturally believe it. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so baked in culture. And that was the beginning of my awareness of like, oh, okay.
And that's so interesting because I think we don't understand, we check Black voices with white voices.
Yes.
So we have to chaperone Black voices by saying, okay, well, what did the white voice say? Because we assume they're authoritative.
Yes.
We naturally assume they're authoritative, and we're like, well, I kind of like listening to the people who are solid, and that's this and this. And I'm like, oh, okay, bet. Who's solid?
Right.
Oh, well, man, this person white, and these two people white. I'm like, hold up.
And then every now and then they'll throw the one brother that's a part of the camp. You know what I'm saying? So
listen, I said, man, can we talk about that real quick?
Because what you'll do, listen, let's be real. Right now, I'm telling you, I'm so sick of people doing it. Do not send me. And I say this again, do not send me a Vodi Bakum video again. You know what? You starting to make me not like this brother. I never met this brother because you weaponize this brother against us.
Yeah. Right.
And this make me not, his book came out, I ain't reading that. Not because I don't have anything, but it's literally because every person out there who I know deep in your soul, you don't like this conversation. Hey, you read Vodi Bakum's Fault Line? You read Vodi Bakum's Fault Line? Right. You need to read that. And literally it makes me inside like, I'm too much of a rebel. I ain't reading that. Because why? It's because you're not using that. And I tell people, okay, you want me to read this? Then here, okay, come here. Here's what I'm gonna call it. You read this. You read that first, and then I'll sit there and read. But don't use Black people against me.
So I guess just going back to everything that we're talking about right now, do you think that I guess the elevation of white evangelical theology and spaces in general is what makes that celebrity Christianity vibe that we have here in America of we are the center of the story. We are the heroes of the story. We're always David, not the other men who are scared.
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, I think it's that the impulse to be famous and popular is in all cultures. I think there has been a greater ability for white evangelical voices over the course of history to actually be in those power positions and attract those big followings. Yeah. But over the past probably 20 to 30 years, we saw an influx of Black people, even heading back into the 60s and 70s with Reverend Ike. very popular Black pastors who were able to amass big followings and become famous. I think that what you touched on, though, that I think is super helpful is this idea that we have an American cultural lens that we view the Bible through. And so it affects our eschatology, how we view the end times. It affects what we think about justice. You know, if you think about the Left Behind series, you know, which I like to say was one of the most shaping series of books for Christians in the West in the past 100 years, because it presented not just, oh, it's the rapture and whatever you think about eschatology, you can think whatever you think, because that's a very debated topic. But what it presented was this very macho brand of Christianity, because if you actually look at them, they were like, these folks like Navy SEALs, and they became like James Bond, like assassins and stuff. And I'm like, bro, how he know how to shoot? Like, how he know? Like, he preaching the gospel in the morning and shooting the Antichrist's minions at night. I'm like, bro, I'm like, yo, that's crazy. This dude. And it was like, yeah, it was Abdullah, and he became a Christian, and he's a sniper and all this. I'm like, bro, what? Like, I'm like, wow, that's dope. You know, but again, that's a very American way of viewing, like, even the end times. Like, and so the American lens kind of puts it in our minds that it's a triumphalist lens. It's a lens that everything's going to work out in our favor because the movie always ends positively and they lived happily ever after. That's baked in our mentality from a young age, that things turn out all right. And that's not the message of the gospel. The message of the gospel is things might not turn out all right. Ask the apostles. Ask the disciples that follow Jesus. They'll tell you, this actually didn't end well. This ended really badly. You know, and so I think that is so true, how it shapes our culture. And celebrity, I told them this before, but fame is poison, y'all. It's poison. You know, if God gives you a platform, praise God, but, you know, be very careful with how you use it. And if you're trying to be famous and popular in a local sense, in a social media sense, or in a national or global sense, it can ruin you.
One of the things I wanted to do, again, we got a couple more questions, but I think, you know, one of the things that's become a big thing, really a movement that's been happening with, again, on Pastor Mike, is this idea of leave loud. And it has been very liberating for many. It is also anything that can be very liberating. It's also been very, it's come off as offensive to others who want to argue about it, and thinking that, you know, that
strong opinions.
Yeah, you and Jamar are, you know, dividing the church and things like that.
You don't have that much power.
They're like
so much power. I'm dividing the church.
They're like the Church of the West. You're like, word? Like, I'm like, wow.
I'm like, bet. Oh, okay, I didn't know it was that powerful. Man. I got the Infinity Stones.
So I guess the question I would say is this, man, kind of let the people know, you know, because again, everyone, you know, I am a big believer in the more and more I push into this, is that, man, I think it's important for people to, one is, again, you know, we hear Dr. Zoe say it all the time, is that, man, you know, anxiety, the idea of anxiety tries to make you an expert at everybody else, instead of the key in life is being an expert of self. And when you're an expert, and the truth is that when people hear whatever it may be, then they begin to say, okay, their anxiety makes them try to become an expert. Well, this is what they really mean. And so what I want to tell people, like, this idea of lead loud, what it's about, and really from your own words, because we are taught, and we trust the spoken word, you know what I mean? Versus going into, you know, 4 levels deep. Well, this is really what it is. No. You trust the spoken word unless somebody else's actions prove something different, but you trust the spoken word. So tell the people a lot about what Leave Loud is all about.
It is hilarious that Leave Loud has become a movement to us. It's really hilarious. Like, I think it was not what we expected at all. It was a text in 2020 or 2019, I want to say. There was an article that came out by Campbell Robertson in the New York Times talking about the quiet exodus of Black Christians who are leaving white evangelical spaces for explicit racism. And so around that time that article came out, we did a podcast on the quiet exodus. And as a result of that podcast on the quiet exodus, people started reaching out to us. And we already had a pretty decent following and audience at that point. But Black Christians started to reach out to us individually and ask us questions about what to do if they're leaving quietly and they think they might want to leave quietly and all these other things. And there was a lot of pain associated with that. And so as a result, you know, in a group text between Ali Henney, myself, and Jamar Tisby, Jamar said, man, you know, a quiet exodus is sometimes necessary, but, you know, we really need to tell people to leave loud, you know, and it's more so leave in a way that really makes it, you know, open and clear that this space was unsafe, unhealthy, and toxic for me as a Black person, because it's common Black understanding that you look out for one another. And so as for looking out for one another, we want to encourage Black Christians not to stay in spaces that are harmful and toxic and unrepentant, to use biblical language, but to find spaces of health and healing in your journey with Jesus. And so simply put, Leave Loud is just an encouragement to white evangelical churches, very simply, don't be racist and discipline those who are. And so that's really it. Like, you know, and what happened is, as a result of this, I've talked with, probably in the last 6 months, 10 Black pastors who are leaving white evangelical spaces or multi-ethnic spaces. And these are just pastors. I'm not even talking about members or, you know, leaders, or, you know, Leave Loud is really structured for the everyday Christian, but it shows us that there are pastors as well who are navigating these very painful dynamics. And so they're trying to say, what will it take? What will it take for the church to listen? And so, you know, if you study the civil rights movement and the freedom struggle, nonviolent direct action was intended to provoke a response. So when I hear that people are responding about Leave Loud, I say, great, because that's what it was intended to do. It was intended to provoke a response. We didn't know it was going to be this big, but it was intended to provoke a response so that people would take inventory and honestly assess whether or not their churches are healthy spaces for Black Christians. And so we believe it's our responsibility to encourage Black Christians to pursue freedom in soul and body. And so as a result of that, you know, we just encourage Black Christians to take inventory. And for many, it's not leaving, it's just having hard conversations and asking questions. And then for others, it is the hard, painful decision to leave, which we don't take lightly. But we don't just believe in deconstruction, we also believe in reconstruction as well.
That's great.
We believe in building healthy spaces, and we believe that those spaces exist, which is why the three of us, Jamar, Ali, and myself, are in church leadership, lead churches. You know, that's what we believe in, because we believe in creating the healthy spaces that Black Christians haven't had.
Yeah. The one thing I do love, and is this fact of what you said is the deconstruction and the idea of reconstruction, because what I think a lot of times, again, we talk about this idea of anxiety, everyone, because they feel like what they've known is being deconstructed, pulled down, what it's easy to do is just then go ahead and lump all of this in. We're like, well, here's what's happening on the progressive left, the deconstruction, like politically and all that stuff. And you just get lumped in there and you're like, okay, well, no one's saying that. But there are things, let me tell you, there are things, I tell people, like, we all freak out about deconstruction. Now, is there again, there are two things to be equally true. Is there deconstruction happening in the world? People just want to deconstruct, don't want to build anything? Sure. Absolutely. Of course. Every generation it happens. But also, you have to say, okay, but also there are people there are things that need to be deconstructed. I think it's okay, like, to deconstruct, to say, man, you know what? We can say if we want to, with what happened with George Floyd, if the movement was not what it was, there's no way that officer be found guilty. There's no way.
No way.
Yes,
There's no way
he's found guilty. The idea is the deconstruction of, let me tell you, I tell people, oh man, pulling down like Jim Crow and civil rights. Yeah, that was good. Like, you know what I'm saying? That was a good one, right? But you know what I'm saying?
10 out of 10 would recommend. You know would recommend.
We recommend that. But people will say, like, well, you know, they would have done this, and I'm like, I'm sitting there trying to realize, like, there are things that do need to be deconstructed, but then it needs to actually, on the other side, to have reconstruction that goes with it. And so I think everyone has to, in these moments, have maturity. And again, it goes back to where I feel like in this generation to come, the importance of people being spirit-led, filled by the power and presence of God, because what it does is it actually gives you the fruits of spirit of joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. It gives you wisdom to say, oh, I can look at this, like, I can throw this out. Nope, we're not going there, but we are going here. Versus it being like, when you're led out of your flesh, when you're led out of your flesh, you're just going to go to an extreme because it's just easier. Versus being in the constant tension of like, nope, I can agree with that. And we were talking about earlier, there's Black folks that were like, yeah, I don't get down with, like, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I think
totally
it's that constant tension that we got to be able to walk through.
We can appreciate them, and we don't have to create sectarianism, and But I think what's so important to understand, and for the people who say to leave loud is harmful, I just say this, okay? Do you want Black Christians who are actually leading churches to be having this conversation, or do you want Black activists to be having this conversation? Who do you want leading the conversation? Which one?
Ooh.
Who do you want to lead the conversation? You want us? Black people who are committed to following Jesus? Or do you want any and everyone leading the conversation? And honestly, I love my activist friends, and I love, people in the culture who are not even believers that I've learned so much from and are walking with. But I think the church, it shocks me that the church thinks this is harmful, that Black Christians are leading something. Who do you want to lead? You? Because they're leaving your churches. So who do you want to lead? Which one? Who would you rather?
Yeah.
Let's pick.
Yeah.
And that point, I think people don't understand is, if you want people leading the movement who are going to throw everything overboard, there are those people. Push us out, silence us, they'll rise up.
They are.
Then you'll have a different problem.
And then you're dealing with, and then what you're ultimately
choose
dealing
a struggle.
That's the thing too, because I tell people all the time, like, everybody wants to be all upset with like Black Lives Matter. I'm like, well, again, there have not been Christian organizations that have focused on justice since the Southern Christian Leadership Coalition. And then you're wondering, why, we don't do this. I'm like, because we do our job.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm so tired. And I've said this before, I am so tired of, in the West, such a loser's mentality in Christianity. It's a loser's mentality. Wow. It's always blaming everybody else for where it's at. I'm like, at the end of the day, listen, if we actually believe we have the power of God that raised Jesus from the dead, if we actually believe the same Spirit of God that helped create in the beginning, that we actually can't solve problems without government help. Wow. Like, what are we talking about? And then you're mad. So my point is, okay, so let's get rid of Black women. So then now tell me what? There's no next. There's just, it's all what you're against versus saying, no. Then give me a solution. And you don't give me a solution because here's why. Because you don't know what you're doing. That's my issue. You don't know what you're doing. This got us here. So let me just tell you this right now. What's really hard is going forward.
He was like,
what's going forward right now is simply this. It's going to be people. Listen, it is for people of color who are willing to manage this tension to lead and going forward. And you know what's hard is, man, for some people, that means, listen, it doesn't mean your voice is not important. It may not mean your voice is the loudest. Because you know what's happened? For a long time, a lot of people like us, our voice went loud. Our voice was something in the background. It was something that we kept saying, trying to be a conscience or whatever. Now, it may be that, again, and what will we have to deal with? Absolutely. Power will be in hands, and what will we do with the power? But you know what, though? It's every generation. But what we're not going to do is back away from it and continue to go, because we know we got. We know what we have. And we can say, yes, it's better. It's all these things. It is. But let me tell you this. We literally have been called to be ministers of reconciliation. So the point is this. Doesn't mean that every space has to look 50. None of that at all.
It doesn't mean you have to leave every white space. That's not what we're saying. We just want people to be in healthy spaces and healthy churches. And I think that's what everybody should want, right? So I'm like, okay, this dude is doing wild racism and he's not repenting. So what you want them to do?
That's the thing. I love how you say it, because it really is that simple.
It's that simple.
Because out in here, I was like, we're talking about people talking about critical race theory. I'm like, most people who argue about critical race theory, which again, we're not gonna get into that. But I'm like, the people who talk about it in their pulpits many times, I'm like, fam, they're on your team. You need to be talking about this. You know what? Actually, you need to be coming up with, how do you detect if actually are you telling them repent because you are racist? Because I tell people all the time, I grew up not in church, so I had no idea sex before marriage was wrong until literally someone was preaching. I'm like, oh, that's not okay.
Right.
Man, I didn't know until someone said something. Same thing. Listen, Paul confronts Peter Yeah. Why? He tells Peter with big energy, you are being racist.
Yeah.
And Peter had to respond.
Yeah.
So if you're leading these spaces, I want to know, are you calling your people to repentance for being this? For having racism in their hearts. Yeah. Are you doing it? Yeah. If you're not, then stop talking about critical race theory. You'd have way more messages about this versus that. Yeah. But again, let's be 100. At the end of the day, why most people don't talk about this, it don't affect your bottom line.
Yeah, yeah. And people, I look, okay, you open a can of worms. But when the people who get upset and the people who freak out about Leave Loud are the people who know implicitly deep down in their heart that it's going to affect their bottom line, or they've been taking advantage and taking Black people for granted, and they're convicted by that. And so they lash out at us because they ain't been doing the work.
Wow.
Study your heart. Study your.
I don't know if we got time. I have at least one more that I have to ask.
Fire away, man.
Part of the Leave Loud, when I first started hearing about it, it bothered me. And it was for that reason of like, oh, so we're about to get some power, and I know what tends to happen. Like when you've been oppressed, and then you get some power. Like, shoot, this might not end well. And part of the thing for me was the solutions. Fix. Okay, that's what happened to you.
Yeah,
and so last night, I'm so glad to get a chance to hang out with you guys last night. And you said something. I was like, oh. Okay, there it was. Can you talk a little bit about what you were saying last night in terms of we just told our stories and now you guys want us to move on from here,
right?
And you want this. What's next? What's the next solution? And when you said that, it pricked me. I was like, that's where I was just like, all right. What's next? Well, how do we fix it? Can you talk about that idea of because I don't know if you can recreate last night, but it was just so. I was just like, yeah, man, we're so busy. We so want the next thing, and we haven't, we don't drink deeply from God to say, okay, I'm just willing to sit here for a little bit.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you could,
man, I don't even remember what I said. But I think I can piece it together.
That sounds really good.
I was like, oh, bet, man.
I said that. That's good.
What I say next? Nah, man. But I think I was talking about, I was talking about lament and how so much of the church is built around moving quickly and getting past moments of tension and awkwardness. And so it was very bothersome to me and to us that we told our stories and people were asking us, what's next? And I said, we lived this. And so if we live this for 30 years of our lives, if we live this for 20 plus years of our existence, you can sit in this for a few more months. Wow. We live this story. This is painful for us. And you can't sit with us in the pain and tension, but you think your solutions are going to be long lasting. Right. No, what about lament is making us, we're so underdeveloped in our understanding of God and how God speaks in silent moments and God speaks in wilderness and God speaks in times where we don't know what to say. We don't know. After Elijah says in 1 Kings 19, God, kill me, he goes to sleep, takes 2 naps, gets food from the angel each time, and then he travels 40 days and 40 nights. Mm-hmm. It's after he wanted to die. It's after he was ideating about suicide. He gets up and he travels 40 days and 40 nights to, I believe, Mount Horeb. He gets up and travels. So where was he going? He didn't really know. He was just walking by himself for 40 days and 40 nights. And we can't even, it's our culture, man, and this is why we don't make change when it comes to racism and race, is because we are begging for solutions when we haven't even sat in the pain yet. We're begging for solutions and we haven't passed step 1. You want step 25? Everybody wants to be expert level at everything. I'm like, man, do step 1.
Yep.
Which is to sit in the pain of your people. Sit in the pain of people you say you love. And that's what God, I think, is challenging us to is, man, the pain of the unknown and the pain of, I don't know where this goes. And I think that lament is what will change the church because our hearts will be truly broken and softened enough for true change to take place. And until that happens, until you can weep with those who weep, doesn't mean They didn't say shed a few tears with those who weep. Weep. And that's what happens. People get in the moment. They're like, oh, I heard this terrible story about what black people go through. 2 tears. And then they're like, oh, wow. I'm so glad I was able to weep. You didn't weep with me.
Wow.
This keeps us up at night. This lives in our bodies. This is pain. When you feel that pain, then you've wept.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't want to hear. They want to hear, I can cry at one service or cry reading one thing. And then, all right, what we going to do about it now? That ain't the way of Jesus.
That's it.
Sit with, why did Jesus drop off the mat from 12 to 30? Didn't do anything ministry-wise for 18 years, 12 to 30. Grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. Though Jesus is quiet, living life, experiencing what we experiencing, feeling what we feeling. And we can't even sit for 3 hours with people like, well, no, it's getting too much. Too awkward in here. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? I'm like, we live with this. This is our lives, man. So anyway, yeah, man. So you got me turned up.
No.
But yeah, but no, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's really something that I think people need to hear, man. The pain, the pain, and it's awkward, and we want nice, neat little bows to tie everything up in. That's not really what God gives us.
To bring the conversation full circle, going back to Q, it was you got to pay attention to what he's saying because he's saying like that is something that through the Black Christian experience, God is actually highlighting, yes, but also to help you in the future as it continues to become unpopular to be a Jesus follower, and you are no longer you are going to need to know how to walk through pain, suffering, and lament. And so
that's why we'll accept anybody as our leader. We'll fight for power, even if it means unholy alliances.
Yeah.
We'll excuse things. We'll excuse iniquity and mess and deception because we don't know what it's like to be marginalized. And so we panic and we'll accept anything.
Wow.
We'll accept anything because we can't live in the pain and power paradox.
And yes, that means what you think it means.
It means 100% what it thinks it means.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, and again, that is a great way to end it because it's so true. Is that hearing what you just said and learning something? It's like, man, we fight for power. I said this. This is 2016, 2017, and I thought it would go to 2024.
Yeah.
I said this.
Me too.
I thought it'd go 2024. And I said this. I was like, President Trump, is the last gasp of white evangelicalism. Yeah. It's the last gasp. It's like the deep breath you take before going under the water.
Yeah.
But it's the water you're going under, it's going to drown.
Yeah.
And it's going to, and the reason why it's happening is because of what you just said. And what I want to encourage everyone is simply this, is that there's always something bigger, why there is the centering of Black voices, and even why I wanted to have, Tyler here, was the fact that I actually believe it's not to say that, hey, the Black Christian experience is better or someone's better. It's not that at all. That's what no one is saying. What we're actually saying is that for where the church is going, that the experience of very specifically Black Christians, but also just people of color in general, is going to be incredibly helpful for the church because again, you guys have heard us say it's more and more, is that it's going to be more and more, we're, as Jesus followed, ostracized, and we have not been used to not being at the top of the food chain. And when no one's going to care, the pain of that, the being rejected, the government maybe reaching into the churches and doing all these things, or the fact of the matter, everyone freaks out, tax exempt status and all these things like that. Let me tell you this, Black churches have learned, and Black Christians have learned how to build with nothing anyway. You've learned how to get it from the mud. And that's why I think that we actually can help. That's why we build the way we build here at Engage, because we're like, listen, when it happens, it's just what I want to do. When the world comes and when things change, I want to be, it's just Tuesday. It's just the day because we've already prepared for it, versus us getting there, but like, I don't know what happened. And then everyone freaks out. And then what you do, you start grasping for things, and then you start honestly compromising
beliefs,
faith and belief because you didn't prepare. And it's very clear what is happening and where the world's actually going. And I believe God is trying to help the church in the West, saying, hey, why these voices need to be centered is because these voices can actually help the church in the revival and the awakening I want to bring.
Amen.
And that is what he's ultimately doing. And so it just comes down to us like saying, hey, are we willing to do it? And so all that being said, Tyler, thank you.
Yeah.
Man, thank you.
This was amazing. Thank you.
You want to?
Yeah.
Those books.
Oh no, yeah. So I was just books I've been reading: Soul Theology by the Heart of American Black Culture by Nicholas Cooper Luter and Henry Mitchell has kind of been helping me construct kind of a theology from everything from the providence of God, to the justice of God, to perseverance of people, family of God, identity, all that from a kind of a Black perspective. And then this helped me, another Henry Mitchell book, Preaching for Black Self-Esteem. This has really helped me. Henry Mitchell says, outside of just preaching the gospel, which is always centered, but the foremost job of Black preaching is the reclamation of Black identity. So you're trying to reclaim something that was lost. Yeah, that's kind of where I took what we do at The Witness is we proclaim and reclaim, proclaim the truth of Jesus and reclaim the lost and stolen parts of our Black identities. So those are just two books. I mean, I could recommend 1,000, but those are two that I've been kind of chewing on, walking through slowly. They give some examples of Black sermons in here too that kind of help, talk about preaching and stuff. It really helps my preaching and, helps me to understand certain things that I didn't know. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, sir, we really appreciate it.
It's my honor, man. It's my joy. It's my joy.
And chopping it up. And again, I want to encourage you guys out there listening to this to make sure, again, for Tyler and his family, to make sure you guys, again, you're praying for them because, again, not only is, he is doing this work in the larger body of Christ, but he is a local church pastor building a church. And so not only is he getting, again, there's warfare that comes from that line, but there's also the warfare that actually comes from just what is happening in the bigger body. So again, I would encourage you all to do that. And so until next time, we'll be back with you soon on Street Theology.